Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Indiana Small Farm Conference. My name is Laura Amell, and I am an assistant professor in the Department of Entomology here at Purdue on the main campus, working on horticultural crop pest management. I'm going to share my screen and welcome you to the session. Okay. So you have successfully navigated to the webinar series for the Small Farm Conference. First, I want to start off by saying thank you to all of our sponsors. Despite the conference being online, we still do incur some costs associated with it. And we have a number of sponsors who have stuck with the conference and been a great support for many years. In particular, when we are online, most of that financial support goes to reimbursing the speakers who are taking their time out to educate all of us who are in attendance. So thank you for that. Before we start in on this session on pollination, we ask that you can complete a demographic survey that tells us a little bit about who we have in the room here. So if you have a smartphone, you can hold up the camera on your smartphone directly over that QR code. If not, you can navigate to the chat box in this meeting and you can click on a link there. So if you hover your mouse over that black bar that will either drop down from the top or up on the bottom, depending on how you're looking, click on that little word bubble chat and you will see that our co-moderator, Alex Pettigrew, has put a link in the chat. Also, we want to make sure that you know how to mute yourself during this meeting. And so I think all of you are muted right now. If you would like to ask a question during the open question and answer session out loud, you can navigate over to the reactions on your navigation bar. It's like a little smiley face, and then in that menu is the option to raise your hand. And if you raise your hand virtually, we will call on you and you can turn on your microphone and ask the question directly. Alternatively, you can type your question in the chat box and Alex or myself will read that out to you, to our speakers. And then lastly, this meeting does have closed captioning enabled, so you should be able to see that at the bottom of your screen. Okay. Oh, in particular, I want to say thank you to the North Central Sustainable Ag Research and Education, NCR SARE. They, in particular, are sponsoring today's session on pollination. And sorry, one more thing. I am going to stop sharing my screen here and we are going to transition. So thank you for your patience. So our first speaker for today is being presented by Dr. Allison Bisline East. She is a postdoctoral researcher in my home department here, entomology at Purdue. She focuses on the conservation of Indiana's native pollinators, and in collaboration with the NRCS, she has been evaluating habitats on farms enrolled in CRP programs, and she will tell you what all those acronyms stand for, I think, with a goal to measure insect and plant biodiversity. Her presentation is titled "Where the Wild Bees Are: Improving Native Pollinator Habitat." And with that, Allison, I'm going to try to share the right thing here. And then hopefully you can take over control.
Okay, yeah, we can see the, it's not in presentation mode yet, but we can see the slides.
Do you see the correct one?
No, we see the presenter view.
Okay. Um, there.
Hey, there we go.
Okay. I'm going to mute and I will try to throw your poll questions in the chat box as we go along.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm actually like after that introduction, I don't really have much to say on this title slide. So I did actually want to start with those first two poll questions that I gave you, Laura. So if we can just see those, we should have some poll questions for the audience. Just to sort of get an idea for sort of what we're looking at, what people's familiarity on these kinds of topics that I'm going to be talking about, and just to sort of, you know, get everybody excited and engaged a little bit. So
just to make sure it works, everyone should see in the chat there a link to the poll question. And once people have responded, I can share that.
Awesome. Yeah. So the first question, is this link for two questions or just the first one?
Just the first one.
Okay, yeah, so if we could get the first two up there, just real short multiple choice questions. So the first poll you should see is going to ask you how important insect and native plant conservation is to you as a person. And then the second question you should see is what kind of crops are you farming or have you farmed in the past? Just general categories. And I think maybe I can move on to the first actual content slide as people are responding there.
Can you see that?
No, never mind. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
So 88% of you said very important.
Good. I'm not going to have an uphill battle trying to convince people this is important.
And now you see the second one, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Great.
Some of you are having difficulties, and sorry about that. We're at least getting a snapshot of you presenting or participating. So thank you.
Yeah, this is for entertainment value. This isn't going to weigh in on anything.
Okay, I'm going to go back to your slideshow.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for your participation already. Okay, so we're going to see if, yes, okay, control works. Excellent. So I just want to start off by talking about Indiana's sort of agricultural landscape. And for any of us who have either farmed here or been out in the countryside, it's really easy to assume that Indiana is made of nothing but corn and soy, because that's pretty much all there is as you're driving through. And I'm certainly not going to say that it's not largely corn and soy, because that is a massive component of the agricultural systems out here. There's a lot of corn, 5.2 million acres. Soy is 5.8 million acres. And these are the 2020 stats from the USDA. So this might have fluctuated a little bit in 2021. And aside from our corn and soy, we've got some wheat crops, we've got some alfalfa, hay, and pasture for grazing. But those are only sort of the main components. I will share that there are actually quite a few. Okay, it's not coming now. Come on. Hey, we do actually have quite a diverse agricultural landscape, even though it's not necessarily reflected in the sort of acreage abundance. So we do have quite a varied agricultural profile. And you'll notice I've highlighted in blue all of the specialty crops. So we've got about 20,000 acres of specialty crops in the state. And that's probably going to be what's sort of most relevant to what I might be talking about here with insect pollination. Okay, well, I just scooped myself there. Laura, can we put up the third poll in the chat? And this question you're going to see if you follow that link is going to ask how familiar you as audience participants are with the concept of ecosystem services. And it's totally fine if you've never heard of them or don't know what the hell they are, because there are options for those responses in the poll. But just to kind of get an idea for what level we're coming into this with. Okay, yeah, so pretty mixed bag. That's kind of what I expected to see. That you may have, heard the buzzword, but aren't really sure what that actually translates to and how that might be relevant to you. So hopefully we can help clear some of that up here today. So ecosystem services, there we go. Ecosystem services are basically a fancy buzzword just to refer to any sort of benefit that humans obtain or reap from our environment. And that can manifest in a variety of ways. Let me, come on. There we go. These can be provisioning services. So this is our really basic food, fuel, fiber, the things that you think of directly as coming from the environment. There's supporting services, which is anything from like soil erosion and water control to biodiversity. We then have regulating services, which can encompass climate regulation, flood regulation, and also pollination and plant pest and disease control. And then finally, there's cultural services, and this refers to anything of aesthetic value or spiritual value or educational value. So today I'm going to be concentrating on these regulating services because this is really where our insect ecosystem services are coming into play. So just a quick rundown of the importance of pollinators and why we should care about maintaining them in our agroecosystems. Pollinators are responsible for 1 in every 3 bites of food that we take, and they're really essential for maintaining output of numerous specialty crops, including things like squash, melons, berries, tree fruit, and nuts. Basically any of those nice seasonal foods that we look forward to eating in the spring and summer as those nice seasonal harvests come in, insects are responsible for most of those. Now, native pollinators we know are often more effective than managed pollinators like honeybees for a lot of different crops, especially cucurbits. So those squashes, pumpkins, melons. We know there's a few native pollinators, native bees in Indiana that are actually 4 to 10 times more effective at pollinating these crops than honeybees. So it's actually better for the crop if they're pollinated by these native bees, and we get more and higher quality fruits from them. And just in terms of our native pollinators in Indiana, we've got 430 species of native bees, and about 2% of all of the bee population in Indiana are non-native, and that does include those managed pollinators like honeybees, because those guys actually came all the way from Europe. Okay, so bringing us back to this nice agricultural map of Indiana here. If you take a look at the sort of agricultural landscape here, this is from USDA Cropscape, you'll notice that most of this landscape is corn and soy, like we saw before. There's some winter wheat, developed areas, and this is kind of a stereotypical snapshot of what we might see driving through the sort of ag-intensive regions around here. But then you'll also notice that there are these little patches, little narrow strips of light green areas, and those are the natural undeveloped areas, and those tend to actually form along a lot of like rivers and waterways, especially in sort of north central Indiana, where we don't have those nice mountains like our southern counterparts. Oh my goodness. Okay. Laura, I think we skipped to my last slide. Sorry about that, folks. You know, this is the way everything ran fine yesterday during the dress rehearsal, but now that it's showtime, everything's going wrong. There we go. Awesome. Perfect. Whoop. Just go back a little bit here. All right. So yeah, this is a pretty typical snapshot of an Indiana agricultural landscape. And you'll notice just how outnumbered those natural areas are by our agricultural areas. And since I'm going to be talking to you about conservation today, we should mention that these natural and semi-natural areas are very important for maintaining our biodiversity and our populations of these native bees. And since we don't have a lot of these natural areas in existence on their own, what we're now relying on are these really small sort of microcosms and microhabitats almost of reconstruction or conservation plantings within our agricultural system. So they're not showing up on this map here because they're actually sort of bundled into these crop landscapes. But as of 2020, we've got about 5,300 acres of pollinator specifically habitat planted by the Conservation Reserve Program, which is what I'm going to be talking about. And that's statewide, which, you know, it's a lot more than some states, a lot fewer than other states. But then we've also got about 56,000 acres in state acres for wildlife enhancement, which is kind of a big sort of umbrella animal and plant conservation program. So, yes. All right. So speaking of landscapes, one thing that we talk about, especially in terms of conservation, is the concept of landscape complexity. And in the previous slide where we were looking at all of those green and yellow boxes making up the entire environment, that's what we call a very simple landscape, because there's not a lot of different types of plants, not a lot of variation in the habitat. It's all very sort of one note. And generally in ecological and conservation terms, the more complex our landscape gets, the better it is for our biodiversity and our conservation efforts. And I'll explain why in just one second. So we can use this photo on the screen as sort of an example to go through here. This is actually one of my study sites in Tippecanoe County. This is a pollinator habitat planting in sort of mid-spring. And the types of habitat features that might jump out right away that you might notice are this sort of grassy meadow in the center that's surrounded by native and naturalized trees. So besides that, this is also, we're adding layers of complexity here because we also have piles of dead wood that are accumulating under the trees, giving more habitats and resources for different types of insects. What we don't see in the middle of this meadow is that there's actually native flowers blooming between May through October. So there's lots of variation in the flowers that we're going to be seeing. There's also a lot of open areas in this field to allow area for ground nesting bees like bumblebees. So the reason that landscape complexity is so important and so beneficial for biodiversity is mostly because of the different habitats that it's providing for different species all at the same time. It also offers additional food, shelter, and nesting resources, especially beyond the crop plants. So if you look at the two photos there on the right, the bottom one, I should say they're both pollinator conservation plantings. The one at the bottom is actually a couple of very narrow strips surrounded by very large monoculture soy fields. Whereas the one at the top is actually also surrounded by a bunch of grassy meadows. So the one on top is certainly going to be a more complex landscape on the larger scale. And then areas without crops planted on them also get disturbed less regularly. So they're not being tilled and plowed and harvested. So we can allow plants to grow continuously for several years. And that also allows animals and insects to build up populations there without having to flee a tractor. These areas are also important for dispersal and migration. A lot of insects use landscape features like these to orient themselves and find resources in different nesting sites. Let's see, they are more ecologically robust, which is important, especially as we're facing down a lot of climate change issues in the near future. But these sorts of landscapes are also less susceptible to large and sudden pest and pathogen outbreaks, which can be really important if you're growing crops in these sorts of landscapes. Okay, and I mentioned climate change. Cool. So I think, Laura, if we could put up the final poll, and I'm just going to keep chatting while people respond to this. Great. So that last poll is just going to ask how familiar people are with government-sponsored conservation programs. So the one that I specifically want to talk about today is the Conservation Reserve Program. These are folks that I've been working with the past couple of years to evaluate the quality and effectiveness of pollinator conservation habitats around Indiana. And in that previous slide where we had the agricultural map there, you might have noticed all those white little pinpoints. Those are all of our study sites that we've had over the past couple of years. So the Conservation Reserve Program actually started way back in 1985, and it was initially formed to address water quality issues like erosion and runoff, and to preserve lands that were sort of susceptible to erosion. So what it's since ballooned out from there. And there's been a lot of different conservation goals that have been added under this umbrella in those 30 something, I don't want to count because I was born that year, 30 something years since that was started. This program, the Conservation Reserve Program, is funded by the Farm Service Agency, and it's sort of co-administered by the FSA and managed by the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. That's what the NRCS acronym stands for. There's a lot of acronyms I'm going to throw at you right now. But basically, this is administered on a state-by-state basis. Every state has its own guidelines and requirements. But in general, to participate in this Conservation Reserve Program, people are enrolled for a 10-year contract. And this is a contract that pays farmers and participating landowners an annual rental per acre that they enroll in this program to do some sort of conservation practice. And that rental rate is largely based on commodity value on a state-by-state basis. There is also some startup cost sharing, but those have just changed. So I don't want to throw too many figures out there for you because they may not be accurate anymore. Okay, maybe we can do the next bullet point. Maybe we can't. Yes. Okay, so the pollinator practice that I've been working with was introduced in 2008. So it's been running for a good few years now. and has very specific management requirements above and beyond what some of the normal, more general wildlife habitats require in management. And the question that we're trying to evaluate with the NRCS at the moment are those pollinator plantings, those CP42s is the practice designation, are they more effective than other wildlife management schemes? So, okay, great poll results. Okay, cool. So people seem to be aware of at least one conservation program, and about a quarter of people actually currently have or have had a contract with one of these programs. So that's fantastic. I'm so happy to see so many people are actively participating in this sort of thing. So just a quick run through of what those basics need to know for a pollinator habitat under this conservation reserve program. Habitats planted under this practice need to have at least 9 different species of flowering plants. It's encouraged that you have quite a few more than 9, but 9 is the minimum. And you have to have at least 3 flowering plant species that flower at each of these 3 time points throughout the summer, early, mid, and late. So it's basically just ensuring that these native pollinators that you're planting these things for have resources all throughout the season that they're active. In Indiana, there has to be between 25 and 50% grass cover. So you can't have more than 50% because then it starts to overtake those flowering plants and cover too much of that ground nesting area. But there does need to be at least 25%, both for things like erosion control and nesting material is also very important. And I should say that for both the flowering plants and the grasses in Indiana specifically, these all have to be Indiana native species. And the CRP has different seeding lists that people can review to choose their species, as well as Purdue has some great references for sort of recommended flowering plant species to use in a seed mix, and Xerces Society for Insect Conservation also has a great list. Okay, so once you're seeded and things are growing, we then need to actually manage those habitats over the course of 10 years. It's usually at the halfway point, but can't start before 3 years. So you have to give everything 3 years to establish. And then somewhere between that sort of 3 and 6 year mark, these participating landowners will be expected to cut back whatever is growing to allow things to then regenerate. And that can be done using methods like prescribed burning, strip disking, or spraying, or any combination of things. There are some months where you're not permitted to cut anything down or perform any management tasks, usually sort of April through August. And that's because a lot of the insects are active during that time. And there's also a lot of bird species that are also active during that time. So we're trying to avoid impacting them too negatively. Yeah, so on the right there, I've got sort of a screen cap of this pollinator practice job sheet. And this is the sort of major strokes bullet points of what you need to know if you're managing this sort of habitat or considering signing up for a habitat like this. I can put a link in the chat to where you can get a lot of these NRCS documents. They're very helpful. Okay. So like I said, we have been working with the NRCS to evaluate these habitats. And we're really trying to look at 2 different things. Firstly, whether these insect communities vary between the type of conservation habitat. So the main things that we're looking at comparing are sort of quail and pheasant habitat versus our pollinator habitat. And you can see pictures of each of those, mostly because wildlife habitats like these quail and pheasant habitats don't have nearly as stringent management requirements. So we want to know that all that effort we're putting in is actually worthwhile. And then what we've been seeing and I'm currently evaluating is what the difference among different pollinator plantings are. So both of these photos that you see here are CP42 pollinator plantings. There's a lot of variability that we're seeing between a lot of these pollinator habitats. So we want to see if that's actually affecting much or if it doesn't really impact too much. And if it is affecting pollinator communities quite a lot, how we can sort of standardize and bring up the level of conservation. So when we were doing our experiments and our field surveys, we would go out to these pollinator and wildlife sites, and we would observe both the plants and our insects. So looking at our plants, what we were seeing in our bird, our pheasant and quail sites was that it was nearly equal, our split between the yellow is our flowering plants and the green is our grass. And this is the sort of land cover that we observed. And then for our pollinator sites, we actually saw about 3/4 of the land area that we looked at was taken up by flowering plants, and only about 26% was our grass cover. So that's great. We've got a lot more flowering plant resources for our pollinators. We had about the same number of flowering plant species between these two types of habitats. And as you see down at the bottom there, the first bullet point, there weren't any unique flower species between either of these habitat types. So anything we saw in our pollinator sites, we also saw present in our pheasant and quail sites. But there was a high variability that we saw between our pollinator sites. And you can see there, sort of in the middle of that donut graph, we saw a range of 14 to 36 flowering plant species based on the pollinator site that we were at. So definitely a range in quality there. All right, so these are sort of the most common top 10 flowering plant species that we saw across our sites. So a lot of coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, some false sunflowers, bee balm was very apparent. We had some milkweed, foxglove beard tongue there down at the bottom, partridge pea, and of course our goldenrods late in the season. And then the last tile there, we just have all other flowering plants. So this was sort of the catch-all for the rest of the flower diversity that we saw. And depending on the site, that could have been comprised by anywhere from 9 to 25 species. Okay, so this is what we saw in terms of our floral diversity. And I know this is kind of a lot to throw at you right now. So we've got our pollinators on the left and our pheasant and quail sites on the right. And I just want to draw your attention to two things. So even though firstly, we said that all of the species that we saw in one type of site, we also saw in the other site, when we're looking at our, oh, my circles just went away. Okay. Yeah, when we're looking at our sort of 5 most common, most abundant flowering plant species on either type of site, you don't have any overlap except for purple coneflower. These were very different flowering plant species that we saw making up the bulk of observations at each of these types of sites. Okay, so the second thing, you'll notice here that the largest bar, this is our proportion of flowering plants that we saw. The largest bars here on the left is actually made up by this blue, and that's our all other diversity. So this is actually saying to us that we had very high floral diversity here in very large proportions for our pollinator sites compared to our pheasant and quail sites, where almost all of our floral cover that we saw was comprised of this singular partridge pea species. So even though we had about the same amount, the same number of species present in every site, the dynamics and the evenness on each of these types of sites are much, much different. And when you only have a single flowering plant species making up a bulk of your floral cover, then that's not necessarily great for your pollinators, who much prefer and are better supported by that high level of diversity that we saw in our pollinator sites. Okay, so we got all this way through without looking at pollinators at all. So now I'm going to show you our pollinators to wrap up here. So these are the sort of major groups of pollinators that we've collected from our sites so far. So we have them separated into these 10 groups. Most of them are bees, although we do have some pollinating flies as well as our butterflies. And this is what our pollinator populations looked like when we compared our two different types of conservation sites. So you'll see our pollinator sites in yellow and those pheasant and quail sites in the gray. And for every group of pollinators that we looked at, almost every single one was markedly more abundant in our pollinator sites than they were in the pheasant and quail sites. So it looks, at least in this instance, that those pollinator sites are actually doing what we want them to. There's far higher abundance and diversity in our pollinator sites than our pheasant and quail sites. So one thing that we're looking at right now are the effects of landscape. Like we started this whole thing talking about that landscape complexity. So this is one of our pollinator planting sites. And what you'll see here, this is that one that I showed you at the very beginning. That's just a couple pollinator strips surrounded by these very large soy and corn fields. Those blue diamonds on the map are our trapping sites where we collected our insects. And the interesting thing about what we saw here was actually that our traps at this site had some of the highest bee catches. So sometimes we would get traps with 60 or 70 bees in a single trap on a single day. That's really uncommon in terms of ecological studies like this. And even more interesting because this was our site with the lowest floral diversity. It was our smallest site, lowest diversity, what we would have considered our lowest quality site. But we think what's happening is this is pretty much the only oasis of non-crop habitat that we have. So they're flocking here compared to our other site here. Nope, overshot. This is that other site that I showed you at the very beginning, that really nice habitat, complex habitat pollinator site. The blue diamonds here are trapping. This was one of our highest florally diverse sites. This one had, I think, 34 different flowering plant species in it. But with these traps, these were some of our lowest pollinator catches. And we think it probably has something to do with the fact that it's such an abundant environment, and even surrounding this site, there's a lot of other wooded areas and meadows. So they don't necessarily need to flock into where our traps are in this pollinator habitat. So there's definitely something going on in terms of landscape. Okay, so I'm just going to wrap up here because I know I'm running late because tech was fun. So just to tell you what we're doing currently, we're looking at identifying all of our native pollinators and doing our community analysis. And we're currently working on identifying them because this is one of my assistants from 2020, Laura, posing with about 2/3 of 1 year of pollinator catches. And we've since added a second year onto that. So we're up to our ears in bees and trying to give them all names. So aside from that, we're also looking at the effects of landscapes and land use, like I was just talking about. I'm also working with several great students looking at questions regarding conservation habitats and how they affect beneficial and pest insects, how seeding records compared to what we're seeing with plant establishment in the field, and sort of non-pollinator community dynamics in these sorts of situations. So that is pretty much everything I've got. And this is my final slide and a shameless plug. If anybody is interested in getting involved in native pollinator research in Indiana, you can go to this link that Alex has just kindly put in the chat and fill out a really quick survey that will let us keep in touch with you. and give us options to involve you in any number of really cool native pollinator questions. So thank you all so much. I'm sorry I ran a couple minutes over. So hopefully I do have time for a couple questions.
Yeah, you actually have 5 minutes. And we have
Excellent.
2 questions in the chat right now. So one question is, do the extension offices like Soil and Water or the DNR help to establish guidelines?
Yes, definitely. Anybody who has a contract with these conservation programs, you will have at least one manager to help you sort of design your habitat and come up with management, a management plan and a seeding plan. And they will check in with you every little bit. I am in contact with a couple different people from different soil and water conservation districts, and they are very hands-on.
Thank you for that answer. And then the next question we have is, do you see effects in pollinator planting from herbicide applications on ag fields?
Yeah, that is a great question, and one that we're hoping to address sort of down the line. There are requirements in those pollinator planting guidelines, that job sheet that I had a snapshot of, that gives recommendations for how to configure your habitat so that it's not affected by a lot of pesticide spray and herbicide spray. But it is something that we need to take into account, definitely.
So if there's one more person wants to unmute and ask a question or put it in the chat, I think we have time for one more before we transition into Joe's presentation.
I have a question, Allison. It may be too early for you to answer this, but given your experience in the field and all of the collecting, could you pick like the top 2 flowers that you see the most pollinators visiting among those plantings?
Yeah, I would say coneflowers are definitely popular. I think probably just because it's so easy to get at the pollen. They're so open and they're so big and attractive and form these nice little clusters. Yeah, I would say early in the season, it's probably coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, and that foxglove beard tongue. Whereas, and bee balm is another big one. Later in the summer, they really like asters and goldenrod.
Very cool. Okay, well, thank you so much, Allison. And feel free to reach out to Allison through her Google form or email her directly if you have any questions. We are going to transition now from native pollinators to managed honeybees, and specifically how to keep bees for honey production. So our second talk today is being presented by Joe Baston. Joe has taken his hobby of beekeeping to a whole new level since receiving a degree in civil engineering, and he now runs around 1,000 hives as his full-time job and has attained a reputation as a successful beekeeper and speaks to both beginning and experienced beekeepers. We are delighted to have you here today, Joe. And your presentation is titled Honey Bees on the Farm. So I'm going to share that. Okay. And let you take over. And same thing we did with Allison, just let me know when you want me to put those poll questions down in the chat.
Okay, you can go ahead and put the first one about experience if you want.
Okay. Are you seeing the full screen or the slide?
Yep, that's the slide, that's right. Okay, while she does that, and we start to make sure everything works here real quick, make sure my buttons work since it's already jumping ahead on me. I'm not sure if I have control yet, Laura. I don't know why. It says I do.
I'm wondering if the wrong screen is up and I tried. Okay, so the poll is in the chat and let me try to stop share and do this again. I'm not sure. Because the slideshow is. It's putting it on the wrong screen. I'm sorry. Right when I think I have it down. Okay, this should be correct. And Joe, you want to try again?
Yep, there's the request.
Approve.
Okay. All right. All right. So yeah, I'm going to talk today about beekeeping specifically for honey production. I don't really have all the time needed to start at the beginning of beekeeping. So that poll kind of will tell us where everybody's at here. And then I can kind of tailor a little bit from there. But what I really want to focus on is what's different in honey production. Well, good. I see we don't have very many unsuccessful beekeepers, so that's good. So I'll try to tend a little bit more to the novices, and try to keep my information a little more small scale and basic. Let's see if I can get it to go through the slides here. Starting out with just a little bit of information about us, a little bit more than what she said. We did start as a hobby somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 years ago. Started with a couple of hives. It was really what it was is we had some grapes and some blackberries growing, and a friend of ours said, "Hey, you really need to get some bees." And so we did, and they died, and we got some more bees, and they died. We got some more bees, and they died. And some of you in that unsuccessful category know exactly how that feels. Laura, I can't get it to go forward at all. Can you go to my next slide? There we go. Thank you. So we are also Indiana's largest beekeeping supplier, and we sell basically everything from the bees, the equipment, the whole 9 yards. We are probably in the top 5 as far as size of actual beekeepers go in the state as well. And as I stated, we experienced losses. It was probably realistically 5 or 6 years before we really decided we had to get with the program. We had to really start learning, buckle down, and figure out what was going on. And everybody in that novice category, you want to beat us to that. You don't want to wait 5 or 6 years to get to that. We'll talk a little bit about what that involves, but number one is getting out and learning. Get to conferences, get to local club meetings, things like that. Get out and get things figured out. And learn what's going on. There's a lot of great resources out there, and a lot of people that can help you through this. Okay. Hey, that time I had some control. So what does honey production look like for us? Obviously, at 1,000 hives, it doesn't look like it's going to for everybody. Last year's honey harvest was 45,000 plus pounds of honey. What you're looking at in that picture is a portion of what's left, what we have not sold since August. We start our harvest on August 1st, and it typically, last year it took us 4 weeks, typically takes us 3 to 4 weeks. That's a little bit weather dependent. You know, we can really only get out there on the nicer days and pull that honey away from the bees. It doesn't work well when it's cloudy. It doesn't work well when it's cool, which in August we don't have to worry about too much. But we did have a few cold, rainy days last year that just were not ideal for that, and that can slow us down a little bit. It usually takes us about a week to set up our honey house, and if I'd ever thought about it before, I might have taken some pictures of it when it's set up, but right now it's really just a giant wreck because it's used essentially as a bottle storage room and a honey bottling room for the other 11 months of the year. The cleanup then on the back end of it takes about a week as well. It's all stainless equipment, so it's all washed down and everything. But to get all the hoses and pumps and everything cleaned up, it takes a while. So we're looking at about 6 weeks out of our entire year is devoted to harvesting this honey. And as we grow this year, we hope to be up around 1,400 hives maybe. And as we grow, this is going to take longer. You know, it could take us 8 weeks this year to get all of that done. So in addition to that, and you'll see a little picture later on wax, you got to consider the other things that you have to deal with when you're harvesting honey. The wax is a big one for us. So I have now spent far too many weeks this winter processing wax, just because there's been a lot of interruptions. And it's quite the process, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later on. The other things that you got to deal with honey are a little bit simpler as far as what your extra work is just on the honey side. You know, bottling can be done fairly quickly. Even with as much honey as we sell, we wholesale an awful lot of honey in barrels and buckets. And so it does go a little quicker. Allison, can you advance me again there? I can't get it to go. Thank you. Are there a lot of rules for honey production? And small text, the short answer is yes. Yes, there are. But we can narrow this down a little bit. So the rules that you have to follow are going to vary by the type of sales that you want to do. On the beekeeping side, everything is very simple. It's the sales side that we have to worry about. So anybody who's extracting and bottling facility has to be good enough for wholesale. And that would be if you want to bottle and sell to a store that is going to resale. You have to be state approved and have what's called a honey house. This honey house has got a lot of rules that have to be followed. It has gotten easier in the past few years, but you got to have wash down floors and 3-bay stainless sinks, as you see in the bottom. That's got to be filled with buckets and buckets and buckets, and you're always washing dishes. If anybody is friends with me on Facebook, my job on Facebook is actually head barrel washer, because it feels like that's all I get done is washing barrels. So little fun tidbit there. The retail side, if you just want to sell retail in your store, in your I think it's called a I'm blanking on it now. Basically, if you want to sell out of like your own little garage setting, you have to have what's called a certified kitchen. That gets a little bit easier. And then the easiest is if you want to sell at farm markets, roadside stands, anything like that, where it's not being handled by anybody but you can be a home-based vendor. And that means you actually can work out of your kitchen. You can actually even get your kitchen certified to be able to sell in some other instances. So there are a lot of rules here. And as I said, they've recently been changed. If you go out to the Indiana Beekeepers website and you go to, there's a tab, drop-down tab for the regulation documents. Sorry, phone's going to ring on me now. If you go out to those regulation documents, it's a several-page document that lays all of this out and makes it a little easier to understand. It's not difficult stuff now that they've gotten to the point where they've done the simplification, but it's still, you got to read through it and understand it. All right, you're all saying, I don't want 1,000 hives. That sounds ridiculous. I agree. You don't want 1,000 hives. You're also saying, I don't even know if I really want 10 hives. I just want to sell some honey. And that is perfectly understandable. 10 hives is the mark where a lot of people draw the line. At 10 hives, you've basically got enough flexibility that you can do your normal job, your family life, all of that stuff, and still get out and take care of the occasional work needs to be done in the bees. It's not really all that time consuming to keep a handful of hives of bees, maybe an hour a weekend, and you can move that during the week. You can, especially during the summer, you can work in the evenings. You've got a lot of options. something you want to consider is what the average hive can even produce. I've got written down here 60 to 75 pounds of honey per the average hive. And that is a good average. But if you do some of the things I'm going to talk about here in a minute, you really should be seeing 100 to 120 pounds of honey out of every single hive. Some hives will produce even more. Now, 60 pounds is a 5-gallon bucket. And if you start thinking about that, that's going to add up pretty quick. And yeah, if you've got 10 hives, they're good producers. You're doing well at beekeeping. That's a lot of honey, and you're going to have to hit the farmers markets and stuff like that to get it sold. Common thing we always hear is, I don't want to be in competition with you or any other beekeeper. And what we tell everybody is there's not enough honey to be in competition. You are not going to influence my honey sales even because I'm not out there selling. I don't go to a farmer's market. I wholesale to a lot of stores who then resell. They set their own prices. They sell the amount they want. And so I'm not even in the same market as what most of you would be in. So that's a big concern for a lot of people, especially when we do classes here and people are learning to be beekeepers and everything. They're like, well, I just want to kind of have some bees and have a little fun and maybe give away a little honey. And we'll talk about giving away honey later, but right off the bat, don't do it. So how can I possibly sell that much? That's another thing people say to us all the time. If I've got 200 or 300 pounds of honey, how am I going to sell that? You aren't even going to have to work at it. Once people find out you have bees, you'll be weeks into this hobby and people will be asking you for honey that you won't have until possibly a year and a half into this hobby. So it's going to be easy. It's going to go. You're not going to have to worry about it. Go ahead and advance me there, Laura. So beekeeping is not self-supported is one of the things that we hear people say all the time. The common joke is if you want to make $1 million as a beekeeper, start with 4 million and quit when you have 1 million. Plain and simple, yes, that's how it is for most people. But it can be a successful job, and we've proven that, and so have the other professional beekeepers in the state. So that's false. You just have to be able to go about it the right way, and it is not easy, especially when you keep a lot of hives. There's a lot to it. There's a lot to consider. But number one, spend the time learning to be a better beekeeper. You can't just get bees and throw them out there. If you do that, you're what we call a bee haver. You have bees, at least until the fall or the winter, and then you will be a bee buyer over winter again so that you can have them the next year. When you become a beekeeper and you actually start to learn about these things, learn about varroa mites, learn about diseases, it seems like it would be a hard thing to understand. How do I assess if my hive has got diseases? The hives get viruses. How do I know what virus? I can't take the temperatures. I don't know what's wrong with them. We can tell a lot of times just by looking, and you just got to learn the signs. It's not always easy to tell what it is. The big thing is if you learn that you've got a problem, then somebody, even like us, you can call us and we can help you solve that problem. So the first step is problem identification. And we really want people to get to where they understand what the signs are of these problems. If people understand those signs, then everything gets a little bit easier. I said, don't give that stuff away. Here it is on another slide. Do not give that honey away. It is entirely too valuable. And Laura, if you want to go ahead and throw that second question up, we'll get a poll question going here about watching honey prices. And my little fun picture over here on the side. Oh, the mess! I did drop a 2-pound glass jar of honey in the parking lot one day several years ago, and it took our bees about a day to completely clean that up. There was nothing left of it, no sticky spot on the pavement, no nothing. It was just gone. So bees will pick it up and carry it away. And oh, the mess is right from top to bottom. if you're going to be in honey production, you should be prepared to just be sticky. It's just the way that it works. Everything is sticky around this building. A lot of times we're sticky. The floor is always sticky. You just make a mess doing this. So let's go to the next. Okay, you got the poll already?
Yeah, I don't know how many people responded, but we got 100% no right now.
Okay, and that actually may be correct. So one of the things that I wanted to point out for those of you selling in small markets or big markets, in the magazine Bee Culture there, this, I think this is this month's edition. The page 19 is the regional honey price report. And I'm not going to go over everything in here, but I wanted to point out a couple of numbers to you. So this tells us for all the regions around the country what the wholesale prices, like bulk wholesale, barrels wise, is, and then all of the smaller bottles as well, selling retail. So something I want to point out that a lot of people don't realize, and we've kind of been telling people that this is coming, and it's coming fast. Last year was a really bad year out west. It was very hot, lots of fires, very dry. There was very, very little honey production out west, and that affects all markets. So let me give you an example here. Last year, bulk honey, 55-gallon drum, amber colored, last year was $1.77 a pound. In February, it was running $2.38 a pound. So that's a 60-cent jump in a pound. So that's a substantial increase. Add to that bottle prices are all way up. Lid prices are up. Label prices are up. In fact, right now I can't even get label paper to print labels. So there's all kinds of compounding issues here. But then we come down here to the retail price section. Last year, a 1-pound jar was retailing at an average. This is an average. A lot of people are higher than this, but this is an average at $8.39. In February, $7.98. So while honey prices are going up, bottle prices are going up, everything is going up, the average price of a pound of honey is actually being sold cheaper. Not sure why that is, not sure why people are doing that. As I look across the other numbers here, half pounds, 12 ounce, 2-pound, they're all selling for more, as they should be. 5-pounders, another backwards one. So people should pay attention to these kind of things. I said that the average right now is 238. We looked around at a few people that we know that are selling bulk honey. Gosh, it's been a month and a half ago, and 320 was the lowest we could find it anywhere. So that number is even going up more. We expect that it will until there's a honey flow this season. So something for everybody to think about. I want you to actually pay attention to those numbers, just so you're not losing more money than you should. Maybe you think you're doing all right, but you should be able to make some money doing this. Laura, if you'd go forward for me. All right, so our goal is to produce honey. And like I said, maybe it's not a ton, but that's our goal. We want to produce some honey. And to do that, you really need to act differently than just being a beekeeper and just having some bees out there and taking care of them and keeping them alive. One of the major things is, are you feeding sugar water? So in the spring and in the fall are the two main times that we need to feed sugar water. When we come through winter, a lot of times the bees come out of winter, they're growing their hive size, we've got a lot more mouths to feed, and there's nothing blooming yet. It's going to be sometime in, most likely early April before we even have purple dead nettle and some of those things coming along. In the meantime, bees are growing and eating and expanding, and everything is moving. So sugar water can be imperative, especially because if you take their honey off in the fall, which is how we get our honey production, then you're really taking what they intentionally collected for their winter stores. So you gotta fill in that gap. Are you feeding pollen substitute? That's another big one. I liked what Allison had to say about about how little of that extra, just flower and kind of pollinator production land there is. When you look at that map, you see it. It's not there. Tree lines even are being cut down all the time. There just isn't a good variety of sources for pollen. And just like humans don't eat all one kind of food, bees don't like to eat all one kind of pollen. They like to have a variety, and there are some pollens that are better than others. Some pollens, such as off of the melons and such, which Allison said the bees are not great at pollinating. That pollen a lot of times is the equivalent of human junk food. It just has very low nutritional value, and the bees just are not attracted to it. So you want to make sure that you're giving your bees the best chance they have. And another thing to watch is, do you know what your honey average is? Do you know what your hives are producing every year? A lot of people couldn't tell you what their hives produced last year. They may know that overall they had X amount of honey, but they have no idea if it came out of this yard or this yard over here or this yard over here. We've found that if we keep bees in a certain place, and if for 2 years that place does not make good honey production, we might as well move bees out and not be there, because it's never going to. There's not enough of those flowers and other things around that they need to be successful. There may be soybeans everywhere, and trust me, bees collect a lot of soybean nectar. In Indiana, that's one of our biggest sources is soybean, but not all soybeans produce either. Only certain types of soybeans produce. So know these kind of things and follow these trends, and know if your bees are in a good place. Another thing we always encourage people to do is not buy bees all the time. Yes, I sell bees. Yes, I'll sell you bees every year. I'd really like you to become successful at managing your own growth out of your own hives. You get some hives through the winter, you reproduce from those. It saves you money. It makes this all more profitable, and it gives you the ability to spend your money on other things, such as new queen stock or new extracting equipment or something like that, instead of buying bees every year and not wanting to sink any more money into it. Are you keeping strong hives or struggling with weak hives? And for most people out there, struggling with weak hives. People are calling in, their bees just aren't growing, they're not drawing wax, they're not doing this, they're not doing that. Many times this is nutrition. The other times it's viral. It's queen. It's poor queen production. That if that queen's not laying eggs, a queen bee should lay 1,500 eggs a day. And if she's not doing that, that hive's not going to grow. It's not going to have the foraging force it needs. It's not going to have anything that it needs to stay strong and to thrive. So we want to watch those kind of things. It's very hard to teach somebody how to watch their queen and know what she's doing, but that's one of the most important things. If that queen's not doing it, get her out of there, get a new one in it, whether it's one that you produce, you buy, whatever. But get a queen that's of known good stock in there, and you'll start to do a lot better. All right, Allison, go ahead forward. All right, so I talked a little bit about feeding sugar water. I just kind of want to glance on the important times again here. Collecting honey can't be all take and no give. You've got to give that back to them. You've got to give them that, especially in the fall. I mentioned March and April already, but I want to talk about in the fall. Almost every single year, as soon as we pull our honey supers off in August, we find that those hives need to be fed. Because we've taken all of that surplus honey, which they kind of eat and replace, and eat and replace, eat and replace as they go through the year. In those two bottom boxes, the brood boxes, the area that those bees live all year long, they oftentimes don't pack much honey in there until later on in the fall, when the asters and some of that stuff is blooming. The last couple of years, it's been so dry here in Indiana that the asters and the goldenrod haven't even produced. So it's imperative that you're watching those hives, and in the fall, you're getting feed into those hives. We fed more last year than we've fed in a long, long time, and it shows. we actually got our bees through with some stores left, and it's not looking like we're going to have to feed much in the spring. There's problems with that as well. We would like to probably have to feed a little bit, but that's a management issue for another day. So as we are talking about sugar water, we're talking about carbohydrates. The other major building block is the pollen or the protein. Just like humans, bees need both. They got to have the carbohydrates as their energy, and they got to have the protein basically for growth. So the protein is usually consumed mainly by the younger bees, the brood as they are growing. As those bees are eating and growing and preparing for their pupation into a full-size bee, they're consuming a lot of pollen, a lot of protein for that growth. And so it's very important that they have this protein really starting from early in the year. Maple trees is one of the first pollens we see come out, and we should be seeing those right now. And that is the first pollen bees have access to start this this ramp up in the spring. So what we learn when there is a pollen shortage is we've learned that there's reduced brood rearing, and that's a real bummer for your hive, because without having that strong brood rearing, you're not going to have the foraging force. They can't go out and collect the honey. They can't go out and collect the pollen either. So really, it's a double-edged sword. Without that good pollen during that growth before that pupation, bees will have a shorter life. Bees already only live for 35 days during the summer. So if they live an even shorter time and there's less brood production, then we've got another multiplying complication here. It's been found that there's low sperm formation, and drones just don't get the flight time and the flight distance that they need to find queens to mate with. And it just leads in general to inadequate drone populations, because if a hive doesn't have an adequate worker population, that being females, they are not going to produce the drones, which are the males. So poor weather can affect the pollen collection and production both. And that's particularly in the spring and the middle of the summer. So during the spring, right now, late winter, spring, whatever you want to call it, as beekeepers, we're kind of always working a season ahead. So we're already working in spring. If those trees get hit by cold, frost, ice, you name it, pollen production goes down. We can compensate by putting pollen patties in hives. And those pollen patties are traditionally very balanced and give them good nutrition. During the summer, we can see dry spells that lead to just plants not doing anything and a lack of pollen production there. Typically in the summer, we will then feed dry pollen substitute outside of the hive, something the bees will go to collect, take back to the hive. They use it a little more readily. It causes less problems in the hive. So lack of pollen leads to cannibalism. So if you're seeing bees drag brood out of cells and it looks literally like they're eating them, they're gnawing away at them, that's cannibalism, sign of lack of nutrition. Brood production dropping in late summer is lack of nutrition. Increased threat of mite infestations. I'm not talking a lot about mites today. You should know, if you don't already, that's the #1 problem that we have as beekeepers. So that's the one thing you really, really need to get on top of. But if the bees have, in general, poorer health, they will have higher mite infestations. Go ahead, Laura. All right, so feeding, I mentioned that during the summer, we feed dry pollen, typically in a feeder that looks something like this. This is like a 35-gallon trash can turned on its side. It's got a little lid over top of it. We dump that dry pollen up in there, and the bees will work it in these clouds like you see, unless there's a natural pollen out there that is plentiful and is good for them. Bees seem to know about this, and as soon as something puts on pollen, they will leave this pollen feeder, and it will just be deserted. There will be nobody there. So the bees know what's better for them, and they know that the natural stuff's better for them than this substitute. So they will work that accordingly. Um, so a regular feeding regimen of both uh, sugar water and pollen can lead to stronger colony growth in the spring, healthier bees all through the year, less disease problems because in general their bodies are just stronger. They have better nutrition and greater honey production, which is what's imperative here. All right, so our summer care is a little more important in honey production specifically. Honey production is very stressful on queens, and we don't necessarily know why, other than the fact that they are producing a ton of brood so that they have that foraging force to collect the honey. But it is more stressful for them, and the more eggs a queen lays, the sooner she will run out of eggs. She's only fertilized once in her life on her first mating flight, and when she runs out, she's out. So these honey collection times can really be damaging to queens. During honey production, you got to get out there. You got to take those honey supers off the top of the hive, and you got to get in them and look at them. It's hard work, but it's imperative. I can't tell you how many people lose their queens and don't know it until too late in the fall, when we can't even get queens and we can't help people save their hives. We can only make queens here in Indiana typically into early August because it just gets too hot, and queen mating just is not successful when it's hot. Queens are hard to find in crowded hives, and that's fine. You don't have to find that queen during the summer, especially. As long as you're finding eggs and the brood pattern looks good, you're good. You're covered. Don't worry about it. Just prove that you have that, and you can move on. It's not difficult to see. It's just hard work to get to that point. Especially early in the year, you want to watch for those honey-bound brood chambers. That's where they've collected too much nectar, or you've fed too much, either one. Or as I mentioned, we come through the winter with too much honey left, and then they go collect some more, and now all of a sudden we've got our brood area where we really want that queen to be laying filled up with honey. And it's really honey we can't do a whole lot with. We'll typically try to add supers and see if they'll move some of that out. A good queen will force worker bees to move honey out of her brood area and up into supers. So that's an option to take care of that. All right, we talked some about honey pricing on a large scale, but I want to talk about what, as a small scale retail person, you should be looking at. So the bulk wholesale market, as I said, it swings wildly. What we had from $1.77 last year, it says $2.38. We're seeing $3.20. So that's all over the map. So what you really got to do is just hone in on your local area. If you're doing a farmer's market and it's got somebody else there, don't be afraid to work with them. It's not collusion or anything, but make sure that your prices are similar so that you both have a good chance it sells. You don't want to go into a farmer's market and undercut the next person by $2 or $3 a bottle and them be mad at you and you not make enough money or anything. So work with the people around you. Know what everybody around you is selling honey for. There are people selling honey all over the place, and so you should be able to find out what even if you go to your club, you just ask, hey, what's everybody selling honey for? People are usually very willing to say this kind of thing. So regional honey prices are affected by other regions, and then that can affect your local honey. A lot of people don't realize this, but a lot of people who sell a fair amount of honey, even at farmers markets and stuff, they're buying a lot of their honey from bigger beekeepers like me. And we sell in 5-gallon buckets and people resell it. It's local Indiana honey. Yeah, it's not your honey, but this is the way that the honey sales world goes. Everybody does it. It's all over the place. It's not seen as a workaround or a bad business practice or anything like that. Once you've got honey customers, do not lose them by running out of honey. That's imperative. Okay, I already talked about cap and bottle prices, so we can go on to the next slide. Other products from the hive. Check out that pile of wax. That is my now over 600-pound pile of wax blocks that I've been processing through the winter out of my machine. And so that's what I've been, working here and there on all winter long. The uses for this: candles, lip balms, cosmetics. People use it to coat foundation, to make new foundation, all kinds of stuff like that. I won't have any problem selling this 600 pounds of wax this year. And as a beekeeper, you can just throw it out on your sales table and people will buy it. Crafters will buy it all day long. So make sure you get your money's worth out of that. And pollen can be collected as well. It's not something that most people want to mess with. It's a lot of work. It's hard to do. And it's hard on the bees, but it can be collected as a nutritional supplement for humans. Helps increase blood flow. A lot of people say it helps reduce inflammation of joints and such. So there's those opportunities as well. Let me wrap up real quick here so we can hopefully answer a few questions. Keeping bees for honey collection is different. You have to treat it different than just having some hives, collecting a little bit of honey for yourself. We always tell people, don't be afraid to look in your hive all year long, even during the winter. You've got to know what's going on in there. For you beginners, this is imperative. If you've got bees out there right now and you haven't looked in them yet, you've missed the boat. You should have been doing this. Get out there and look in them. Try to get a day when the temperature's up a little bit from where it's at right now. The next couple of days would be great days. Go look in those hives. Don't pull frames of brood and such like that and freeze them out, but look in those hives. Bees that are not taken care of will not survive. We've all proved that. That's not a hard one to understand. You'll never know it all. No one does. It changes every year. Believe it or not, this is a very quickly evolving thing. Go to those club meetings and find out what's changing. They'll tell you, and have fun. Absolutely. If you're not having fun, why be doing it?
Thank you so much, Joe. That was really great. We do have a few questions in the chat that I will start with, and then if people would like to raise their hand and ask some more and unmute, please feel free. But the first one, going back to when you were talking about the honey houses, Alex asks, does the local health department inspect or approve a honey house, or is there some other entity that certifies honey houses?
Sure. So that varies by the level at which you are. So for an actual honey house, that's state approved. And that gets you straight to the top. I mean, that gets you the ability to sell in any and every situation. When you go down the steps, that's when you start to get into the county health departments. The county can give you that certified kitchen permit.
Great. Referring back to the picture you had of the pollen feeder, that big barrel, Jessica asks, does open feeding of pollen like that raise issues of robbing?
It does not. Open feeding of sugar water does. Open feeding of pollen, for some reason, is a completely different animal. We've never had a robbing frenzy started because of pollen feeding, even when we've got all of our hives setting in one yard. It's just different. I can't explain it. I don't know why. I just know that it's different. In fact, pollen substitute doesn't even attract any other insects or anything like that, and no animals. So it's a completely safe thing to do.
When you feed with sugar water, then do you feed that at the hive level? You put
Yes.
it right in?
Yeah, we always feed sugar water inside a hive. We don't even feed on the fronts or the tops or anything like that. We always go straight inside just because we have so many bees. The hobbyist would have some more options, but I recommend shying away from open feeding in all cases.
Okay. Kai asks, did you learn more by studying, reading, speaking with folks that were already beekeeping, or did you have a better grasp after you started doing it yourself and could really be hands-on?
The hands-on thing is always important. We really see that. We get a lot of people will take our beginner class, have bees for a year, and then take the beginner class again because now they understand what we were talking about, what they're seeing. But it really, for us, it was about starting to go to the meetings at local club levels and even state organization levels and start to listen to other speakers talk. When we started getting involved with Purdue, that's when things really picked up for us. We're to the point this year where I'm actually going to be starting some microscopy, looking for tracheal mites and nosema, which is bee diarrhea. Things that no hobbyist would ever do, but just because just because I have the equipment, and we're curious if these are some of the issues we're fighting. And this has just come out of sitting around listening to people talk, basically.
Alex asks, how did you transition from civil engineering to the honey and bee business?
I took a really weird off ramp into a fabrication business. It doesn't line up at all, but no, our previous family business was a fabrication business. We just all kind of decided we were tired of the fabrication business and wanted to do something else. We were enjoying bees. At the time, we were keeping bees, not on a professional level, but maybe a couple hundred hive level. And we just thought, this seems like a nice thing to do. We enjoy the benefits of it, and we just wanted to go bigger with it. And unfortunately, for it to be to make a living, especially as an entire family, you've got to go big. You can't just kind of go.
Jessica says, thank you so much. That's really interesting. What kind of feeder do you prefer?
So like I said, we feed inside the hive. We use the division board feeders, which replaces a frame or two. For us, we always replace two in the top box. So we run 10 frame equipment with 8 frames and a feeder inside the hive.
When you place your hives, do you have a prescribed number of acres available per hive?
That varies by location. You kind of got to look at what's around you. So we've got some properties that we know from years of experience, like our own here at the farm. We can have 70 or 80 here at the farm, and they're all still going to collect very well. We've got other yards that 16 is the absolute max that it will hold. What we look for is the point of diminishing returns. We know that every single yard should produce roughly 4 barrels of honey. And if we've got a yard that only produces 4 barrels of honey with 32 hives on it, then we're going to reduce that number of hives the next year and see if it still produces 4 barrels of honey, because it just is it is so dependent on what's around. I mean, we've got properties that are near state parks, national forests, things like that, that just produce like gangbusters. And then we've got farms that are on sunflowers and soybeans that produce like gangbusters. And then we got farms that are on hay fields that just don't produce. And we're like, well, they let the hay bloom. Why? What's going on here? But there just isn't anything else around those. They're kind of landlocked by things that are not producing. So you really got to look around.
One more question here from Taylor. Where can we find information on your classes?
So our website has our classes in recorded form that you can purchase. They're $20 for the beginning class, $20 for the intermediate class. You get all the paperwork with it. Unfortunately, last year's honey harvest was so bountiful that our building is full of honey barrels this year, and we could not find the space to host classes in person. Not to mention, I had a knee surgery this year. We had a handful of other things, and it just didn't work out. So no in-person classes this year, but all of that is out there on our website, bastonhoneybeefarm.com. You can go there, go to the educational materials section, classes, and you'll find it there.
Great. I just put that in the chat for anyone
Thank you.
who's looking for it. Okay, we have about 2 minutes left, and I will continue to read questions if any more pop up, but I do want to share one more thing on my screen and say once again, thank you so much to NCR SARE for sponsoring today's content in particular. And we ask that you please go to this new QR code, or Alex posted in the chat earlier, and maybe she can throw it up in there again, the link to an evaluation. So we're asking you to provide your feedback, particularly on the pollination session that you attended today. I have a mandatory slide or message to share here that says Purdue is an institution, is an equal opportunity provider. And lastly, want to say, save the date. We really hope that we are back and in person, March 2023, the 3rd through the 5th in Hendricks County. We have had some questions about access to the recordings of this webinar series, and so that will be communicated with you in April. If you have registered for the conference, which you are here, so you have, you will get email communication, or if you subscribe to the Diversified Farming and Food Systems newsletter from Purdue Extension, we will also communicate in that newsletter of how you can gain access to the recordings. And thank you so much again to Allison and Joe. It was really great to talk about pollinators for an hour and a half today. And now I want to go outside and see if any of them are starting to wake up. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Next, we will see you back next week, Thursday, for the livestock track. So those of you who raise livestock, join us on Thursday at the same time. Thank you.